The Baroque era was a turning point for music history, bringing about loads of changes and transitioning from the Renaissance era of innovation towards a more streamlined and distinct genre of music. Not only did it implement the concept of tonality, it also broadened the compositional possibilities through the encouragement of instrumental and non-religious music. New music genres like the opera, partita, sonata, and concerto grosso flourished.
A very important genre of music was the suite, a collection of dances which garnered popularity, especially in the French court, where dancing was a common activity. The suite incorporated dances from all around Europe, such as the Allemand from Germany, Courant from France, Saraband from Spain, and Jig from Great Britain. All dances came from Western and Central Europe, but why not from Eastern Europe as well? The closest we have is the Polonaise, but Polish culture at the time tended more towards the West. So why didn't Baroque composers use Romanian, Bulgarian, Hungarian, or Russian dances?
To confirm, we first checked all the works by Johann Sebastian Bach, who famously wrote music of all species apart from opera.
I got nothing.
I simply don't find it.
Despite that, we were left empty-handed. So why didn't Bach ever write a Hora?
Where are Bach's Scribds?
Quite possibly, the most feasible explanation is the following. Eastern Europe was at the time more underdeveloped than Western Europe, so interest and knowledge of the region was limited. Beyond that, the Balkans were under the control of the Ottomans, who were seen as public enemy number one, while Russia at the time was just beginning its rebranding into a global superpower. That's not to say that in the 16th century they didn't suffer from an economic crisis and several famines. Therefore, many elites from the West mainly didn't know and probably also didn't care about Eastern European culture, where dances were practiced by peasants for peasants. And one can't say that there were any representatives of the Eastern Europeans to come and share our habits with the French court, since, as previously mentioned, the peoples of the Balkans were notorious for being a step behind the rest of Europe in terms of culture. By the time the Enlightenment age came about in Western Europe, anyone past the Carpathians didn't yet get a good taste of the Baroque, and this cultural desynchronization continued up until about the Revolution of 1848. So naturally, there was nobody to showcase these cultures.
However, even if there were a Romanian, Bulgarian, or Hungarian messenger to enlighten Baroque composers on our sort of dances, I highly doubt that they would have cared all that much. Why do I say that? Well, the answer lies in the very different style of music present in Eastern Europe that did not interact and mix much with whatever was going on in the West. The Baroque era introduced the tonal system in response to the modal system used in medieval and Renaissance periods. In a very oversimplified way, this system consisted of different scales, the most commonly used being the 7 Greek modes, each of which started from one of the 7 notes of the major scale. These were in ascending order: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. The tonal system, on the other hand, only used 2 blueprints, which could be used on any one of the 12 notes of a scale. These were the major and minor, both later being split into 3 variants: the natural, harmonic, and melodic, the latter 2 being used predominantly for the minor scale. Based on this system, musicians of the Baroque era developed the concept of voice leading, something that modal music did not have and wasn't based upon. To cut a very long story short, the modal and tonal systems did not really mix very well, and composers at the time really wanted to avoid any modal sounding music to distance themselves from the outdated sound of the Renaissance. And guess what? Romanian, Hungarian, and Russian music were all modal styles of music. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that the French, Germans, and Italians would have cared for these sorts of melodies.
It's true that by the time classical music rolled around, Eastern European music, especially Hungarian music, became more sought after, as can be seen, for example, in the third movement from Haydn's Keyboard Concerto No. 11, called Rondo al Ungherese. And of course, the Romantic era saw the rise of national schools of music, with composers like Johannes Brahms and Franz Liszt representing Hungarians, Chopin and Wieniawski with the Polish school, and of course the entirety of the Russian school. But notice how these are the classical and Romantic eras, and not the bloody Baroque.
So that's it then. Eastern European music just never mixed with Baroque music.
Oh well then, it would have been nice, but it never happened. Or so we thought.
Codex Caioni was one of the most important music collections that originated from Transylvania in the late 17th century. This codex contains anything from motets and sacred music to regional dances. It was written by Matias Zeregheli and Ioan Căianu, also known as Johannes Caioni, who was a Franciscan monk and organ technician. Born in Wallachia, or present-day Romania, Caioni himself actually stated, "Natus Valahus sum," I am born Wallachian, and you can do with that information what you will. It is possibly one of the most important musical texts to come out of 17th century Eastern Europe. Yet after the Second World War, it was lost, aw man, and only found after the collapse of the communist regime. By that point, only a few pieces were known from it, 10 Romanian dances collected by composer Marcian Negra in 1941 for his paper, A Romanian Transylvanian Composer of the 17th Century, Toni Caioni.
The codex has now been edited in Budapest and can be found in a collection called Musicalia Danubiana, split into 3 volumes, one with the scans of the original manuscript, or whatever was left of it, one with the codex transcribed into modern musical notation, and one with comments on the work. The music here is technically Baroque music, however, a lot of it tends towards modal music, like for example the following piece, Chorea Polonica. The term comes from the Greek word chorea, meaning dance, a Polish dance in this case. The Chorea Polonica that you heard is a great example of modal music and tonal music brought together in a piece.
Another example of Baroque music with a modal twist can be found in the 2 fugues from the codex. The first one was in G minor, yet its key signature only has 1 flat, therefore we have a G minor Dorian hybrid. The second one is in C major, however it ends on a G major chord with no other piece that follows it. It also has a very interesting theme, which if analyzed tonally is either in C major, but it starts on and rests on the dominant pretty much until the last note, or it is in G major and ends on a subdominant. Truly bizarre. Another interesting thing is the amount of courants that appear in the codex, totaling about 17, which is more than any other dance. Most of these courants, like pretty much all pieces in the codex, are written in a very plain manner. However, there is likely a reason for it. Let's take the following one as an example. This courant is written as a melody with a bass line, nothing special. However, it might have been written like this to offer the performer freedom regarding improvisation, because once one adds complete harmonies and ornamentation, it only sounds much more juicy and interesting, even a bit livelier. Here is an example of what it could sound like. See the difference? Of course, this is what we were able to write, and do keep in mind that we don't know how to improvise, but I'm sure the Baroque musicians would have done a better job at this than us back in the day.
If we missed anything or got anything wrong, do let us know in the comment section below, since it does help out a ton. And now that you wasted 10 minutes of your ever-shrinking life hearing us ramble about Transylvanian music, go improvise on a Baroque piece and get out of here.